October 1st. Ordinance Committee meeting. Ms. Crescente, would you call roll?
Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez.
Present.
Councilmember Sneddon.
Here.
Chair Jordan.
And here.
Thank you.
Just make a quick announcement off the top. We're going to switch the order of the items today, so we'll take the waterfront department item prior to the city attorney's office. And Nicole, if you would go ahead and set us up and read that, please.
Yes. Subject, amending Chapter 22.70 of the Municipal Code regarding sign regulations and adding chapter, we're not doing that one, are we? Nope. Sorry. Let's start over. We're going to do item number 2 first, which is amending Municipal Code Section 17.08.10 pertaining to the Harbor Patrol powers and duties, in Section 17.08.040 pertaining to carrying of firearms in the harbor.
Thank you. Mr. Wiltshire.
Chair Jordan, Ordinance Committee. Will we give a brief presentation on this item today? I've got with us Nathan Aldridge. He's our Harbor Operations Manager. He's been very involved in this process and oversees our Harbor Patrol unit, so he'll be leading the presentation today. So, Mr. Aldridge.
Good morning, Committee Chair Jordan, Committee Member Sneddon, Committee Member Gutierrez. My name is Nathan Aldridge, and I am the Harbor Operations Manager of the Waterfront. And today I'd like to present to you an update on California Senate Bill 2, and specifically its effects on our Harbor Patrol here in Santa Barbara. Okay, next slide. So first, for some background, on September 30th of 2021, Senate Bill 2 was signed into law by Governor Gavin Newsom. Some aspects of the law took effect on January 1st of 2022, and other provisions have a later effective date. The bill significantly impacts law enforcement agencies across the state. And one of the major legislative intents behind the bill was establishing a more centralized and regulated state oversight over peace officers, as well as increasing accountability for officer misconduct. On April 18th of this year, and again last month in September, Harbor Commission received a waterfront presentation on Senate Bill 2, detailing its statewide effects on law enforcement authority, training, and reporting requirements. Additionally, Senate Bill 2 specifies that law enforcement agencies may employ only peace officers who hold a current and valid State of California post-basic certificate. And what that means is all peace officers must complete a full police academy. There is no grandfathering for current Harbor Patrol officers to keep peace officer status. No Harbor Patrol officers have a post-basic certificate. A police academy is not a requirement to become a Harbor Patrol officer, as the content comprises a small amount of the actual job duties. And so to comply with the law, our department consulted with Post, City Attorney's Office, Santa Barbara Police Department, City Administrator's Office, Human Resources, staff, and current Harbor Patrol officers. And Police Chief Gordon advised as a subject matter expert as she sits on the Post Commission. So in summary, all departments with peace officers must become a post-participating agency, and all peace officers must attend a police academy. And this change applies to all other Harbor Patrol units throughout the state, and we are fortunate that Chief Gordon is a Post Commissioner who could help guide us through this legal process. Next slide. So the primary effect going forward will be changing Harbor Patrol's peace officer designation and removing the carrying of weapons. Majority of Harbor Patrol's duties will remain unaffected. Harbor Patrol officers will not be armed peace officers and will change their uniform and duty belt to reflect this transition. Harbor Patrol's primary duties will continue to be emergency medical care, and boating safety enforcement, ocean response and rescue, and enforcement of harbors and navigation law and municipal code violations within the Harbor District. And looking at this, it was a collective decision largely informed by our police chief and the city attorney. And our department and city fully evaluated all options going forward and chose the approach that is the most realistic, feasible, and responsive to our community needs. Next slide. So in our municipal code, 2 sections will be changed in order to comply with this legislation. Section 17.08 17.08.10 will be amended to strike peace officer designation with law enforcement the primary duty for the waterfront director and his or her appointed deputies. And then next slide. Additionally, section 17.08.040 will be amended to recognize harbor patrol officers as harbor police under the California Harbors and Navigation Code section 663.5. And this section of the code continues to give harbor patrol officers authority to enforce all boating laws as well as our local muni code within the harbor district. Next slide. And lastly, that same section 17.08.040 will be redlined to remove authorization for harbor patrol officers to carry firearms since they are no longer designated peace officers. Next slide. The waterfront has broadly messaged the impact of Senate Bill 2 to the public, both formally and informally. So first, Harbor Commission meeting in April described the bill and its effects on all law enforcement agencies. We then held a community meeting with panelists from our city's emergency response team to answer any questions the public may have. In attendance was Chief Gordon, Operations Chief Fetterman from the Fire Department, Director Wilshire, myself, Harbor Patrol Supervisor Lieutenant Kelly, and Harbor Patrol Officer Martinez. And we also presented again to the Harbor Commission in September to lay out Harbor Patrol's transition away from armed peace officers, detailing our law enforcement response, a new uniform, and our authority. Next slide. So for all intents and purposes, the only change most community members will notice is that Harbor Patrol officers will be wearing a different color shirt. So our new uniform color shirt will transition from tan to navy, and the duty belt will communicate a visual translation away from their previous role as an armed peace officer. Next slide. It's important to note that work has been done to make this transition as smooth as possible. For law enforcement in the waterfront, the city prioritizes full coverage in our harbor district in the waterfront area. The Santa Barbara Police Department will continue providing responses to calls for service in the waterfront area, specifically penal code violations and our calls for a service that may lead to a detention or an arrest. There will be no loss of coverage within the waterfront for all public safety, including law enforcement, fire, medical response, and ocean rescues. And in the Harbors Navigation Code, namely 663.5, it will still authorize Harbor Patrol officers to enforce all provision of California boating law, as well as local municipal code in Santa Barbara. So in summary, the change will not affect the vast majority of Harbor Patrol's calls for service or their primary duties. Sections 17.08.010 and 08040 will change to reflect the removal of peace officer designation and the carrying of firearms. And officers will continue to respond to and enforce all marine law enforcement and muni code violations in our harbor district. Harbor Patrol officers will continue to respond to all medical emergencies, ocean rescues, marine firefighting, and boating emergencies. And the Harbor Patrol will continue to provide the highest level of service to our city and to the entire waterfront community. And with that, I am happy to answer any questions that the committee may have.
Questions from the committee? Mr. Gutierrez.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, staff, for the report. Just curious, how many times have the Water Patrol had to use their weapons, or sorry, to pull their weapons out at the very least?
Yeah, thank you, Committee Member Gutierrez. In my understanding, a firearm has not been discharged in the line of duty in the last 50 plus years, as far as we know. Occasionally over the last decade or so, there have been a maybe handful, 2 or 3 times when an officer has had to either take out their weapon. But those calls in terms of our law enforcement contacts are incredibly rare. As far as calls for service that would even be affected by this legislation, what we would respond to that would lead to even an arrest, or the police department would be the primary unit. I looked at our 2022 and 2023 calls for service, and less than 1% of last year's calls would be even affected by this legislation.
And how does the concealed carry license affect their role? Like, are they still able to carry one if they have a license to conceal carry, or would they not be able to carry one?
Yeah, there's a bit of a complication there in that as a peace officer who is acting under the authority of your position in the law, you are held to sort of different legal standards as a private citizen with a concealed carry law. So with the removal of peace officer designation for officers on duty, according to our legal counsel and the Chief Gordon, it would be complicated in order for them to conceal carry and would not be the most practical consideration for our officers.
Gotcha. Okay.
Chair. Sorry about that. Chair Jordan and Councilmember Gutierrez. To that, so a Harbor Patrol officer still could get a CCW, concealed weapon permit, but they would have to carry that off duty. On duty, they're restricted from carrying it. So they could get permission under the chief of police to do so, but with this new designation, as both Mr. Aldridge and Mr. Shire said, this is good from a liability standpoint due to the change in the law. It protects the city, protects the officers, protects, in terms of the resources we need to comply with under SB2, while at the same time, they are still covering the exact same duties. They're able to detain someone, they're able to issue boating citations, municipal code infractions, but what they're not able to do is make arrests, custodial arrests.
Gotcha. Okay. Are Harbor Patrol issued Kevlar vest?
Yeah, thank you. Committee Member Gutierrez, currently, before our duty belt and our ballistic armor would be part of their assigned uniform, and going forward, they would not be carrying a firearm, taser, handcuffs, or a vest.
They won't?
They will not, correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Ready? Go ahead. Ms. Sneddon.
Thank you, Chair. That's just a follow-up question. Could they opt to wear a vest? A vest isn't only the jurisdiction of a peace officer. That could be just a safety element.
Yeah, Committee Member Sneddon, thank you. That could be a possibility if they wished. They're not prohibited from doing so. There was a lot of discussion with officers initially in looking at this bill into finding a way forward that would keep officer safety paramount. And that's a consideration that's very important to me as a former Harbor Patrol officer myself. And the consideration of not putting them in a situation where they would need to possibly escalate that use of force continuum. Looking at all the different tools on the tool belt or weapons would be, escalating force in order to effect an arrest or to gain compliance. And so without that, firearm, having an officer that looks the exact same as they did before, and putting in a situation, the officers overwhelmingly decided that it would be much cleaner and much better from a public standpoint too, for them to completely change their appearance and have no weapons on their belt, than to look, basically identifiable as the same officer they were before, just without a firearm.
Thank you. I appreciate that consideration. I think that's important that it be flexible and up to the Harbor Patrol. I guess we don't call them officers now. What do we call our harbor?
Yeah, they'll still be an officer.
They'll still be an
That's correct,
officer.
yeah.
Okay.
And just under the California Harbors Navigation Code, the designation, they call it as a harbor policeman, but they're still referred to as officers in the code.
Okay. Thank you so much.
I have several, and I suspect I'll involve all of you and Chief Gordon. So I have no clue what the difference is between what we do now versus what we wouldn't do when it's a penal. The line is you don't respond to penal code, but you can respond to ordinances. I've known enough tenant people down there before to know that the Harbor Patrol has generally been the first response as a typical police officer. And I don't know if these are penal codes or enforcement, but that would be, people drunk, alterations, battery, assault, whatever that would kind of be. So could you talk about that and then maybe you gentlemen can talk about that, but then Chief Gordon, if you would come up and share what the projected burden would be then on response, more responses from the police department and response times, and if we're just digging another hole that has to be filled to respond to this that we haven't come to yet.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Jordan. I can address your first question and then turn it over to the chief. As far as local municipal code, during the daytime, we have generally 2 officers on duty, 2 or 3 with our supervisor. And we have a report, just say an example of a subject disturbing or someone's intoxicated, refusing to leave. Our officers during this would feel comfortable going to contact that individual. And if it looked like it was going to lead to a more involved scenario, or upon their perception, it could devolve into a more involved contact, the person's not cooperative, just like we do now and we've always done, we would call the police and to see if we can get a cover, and they would come. And so a lot of that's going to be up to the officer's discretion, but there are going to be some calls that the police department will take the lead on. For example, the subject actively fighting, or a report of a vandalism or break-in, or a subject inside a building after hours or so. Going forward, our officers will not be the primary responding unit to those calls.
And my perception is true, right? Prior to this, the waterfront officers would have been the first, without some weird thing, or the police officer sitting right there already. The waterfront officers would have been first on scene, even first called by one of the tenants to respond, correct?
Yeah, Chair Jordan, oftentimes that would be the case.
Okay.
The police department has a fantastic response time, and so if during those scenarios where we found out that, say, the building was unsecured and we wanted to do a prem check, officers would come from the police department within minutes, and we would stand by and wait for them to come
Okay.
and to take the lead to assist that, even now, before this legislation.
Before I give the chief for a moment too, I heard 2 different things from both of you. So I heard could still detain, and I heard they're not carrying handcuffs anymore. And so I'm curious how you get to detain, could still detain without handcuffs as part of the outfit.
So detention does not necessarily mean handcuffs.
I
It's a
know,
legal
yeah.
definition, so they could still detain without handcuffs.
Okay.
So if we're taking someone's ability to leave, we're telling them they're not able to leave, that is considered a legal detention.
Okay.
So it's a legal terminology and not related to whether you're applying handcuffs or not
Or a
applying
physical,
handcuffs.
not a physical act.
It does not have to be a
Okay.
physical,
All right.
put you in the back of the car or physically put handcuffs on you.
Okay. So my question back to you was, are we also creating an additional burden on the police department, whereas before a scuffle, a fight could have been or would have been handled entirely at waterfront up until the point of somebody having to transport the person? And will that need to be addressed in the future?
So, Councilmember Jordan, we've been working through this as a team, and that's not going to create additional burden.
Okay.
A majority of those calls, yes, they may have been the first ones, Harbor Patrol, because they are closest, but typically, that would also require our response anyways. So, they typically work with, on a good day, they have 2. That's not a situation where we would want 2 Harbor Patrol officers responding to that fight by themselves anyways. We would want additional response. So we are one team. We have already changed our response patterns to ensure that Harbor Patrol has the appropriate backup from our officers, the appropriate coverage. This has not been done in a vacuum. This has been very much done as a one-team movement forward. And I think what you will actually see is better response in the waterfront, because you have the same fine Harbor Patrol officers that you've had, and now they will have the appropriate response and resources from us, and they'll be able to focus their responsibilities on what they are truly should be doing and what they do 99% of the time.
Okay, thanks. Then back to the waterfront people, the overall feeling you get from those you already employ, this is a good move, nobody's going to be scared for their safety, to be able to approach people, everybody seems in concert with this moving forward?
Yeah, and thank you, Chair Jordan. I think it's a great question, and back to my previous comment about keeping officer safety at the forefront of our decision making. I'm really pleased to report that morale is really good right now. I think working through this process and the evolution of which have we made sense of not only just complying with this, but our role moving forward, echoing the chief's previous comment, it enables us to really concentrate, I think, on boating and boating safety and being out there on the water, which is the bread and butter of what we do. You know, we're the only boating safety unit from Port San Luis down to Ventura, you know, and if you look at what we do on, you know, sunny day, we're out there on the water in our vessels, walking around the marina. You know, the idea of community policing is really baked into the fabric of what we do on the waterfront. And being accessible and all of what we do is very, very important. I think this will enable us to do that. And the officers I think they're optimistic and positive about this step. And just anecdotally, with this change kind of in the background, we had recently undergone a recruitment for several different positions. And with the final numbers, I think we've had over 10 times the amount of our highest applications we've ever had without requiring, you know, a firearm and a peace officer.
Kind of broaden the population that could come
Correct.
down and do that, right?
Yeah, and it's a very, as you know, a very specialized job in what we do. It takes a lot to get all the certifications. And so to me, that's a great sign of going forward that, you know, we're continuing to attract and recruit really quality people to do that job. And to add on to that last question you had about a detention, you know, the vast majority of all detentions that we do is on a boat, really. And people don't think of it as a detention, but it's stopping someone and checking, hey, do you have your life jacket? Or it looks like you guys were operating in the swim zone. Want to make sure you guys have, don't have expired flares, your registration is current. And, 99.9% of those are positive. People come away with a good feeling about, I think, boating safety, they're educational. We're a preventative safety force.
Yeah.
And it's important for us that, we continue that, and that's in our DNA, and going forward, that will, by all means, continue to be our presence out there.
Last question, and that's just a touch base on the community meeting and the outreach you had. So it'd be safe to say that you had broad attendees, or somehow you've reached out to the broadness that you've gotten this news out to the liveaboards, the slip users, and the actual business tenants that are part of your stakeholder groups. They all know this is coming and are ready to adjust to the guy or gal walking in through the door necessarily isn't the same function as the last one who did.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Chair Jordan. That's the case. We flyered the marinas. We sent posts out on social media. In addition to our 2 Harbor Commission meetings, that community meeting I was attended by the chief and the individuals I mentioned before. And a lot of it is just going to be educational to assure people that we're still there. Nothing is changing. And part of I think the uniform change is going to be a visual communication of that. And I think it's a great talking piece. As the officers are out in the community now, they're engaging with our various stakeholders down there on the waterfront. As you know, it's a small community. And
Yep.
so from Santa Barbara Landing to the yacht club to slip permittees to liveaboards, we have constant communication out in the field with our officers and those stakeholders.
Okay.
And I'm proud to say I think we have a very strong relationship there, and that's important that stays the case going forward.
Okay. Thank you. Any public comment on this?
Chair Jordan, we do not have public comment
Okay.
in person or online.
So we'll bring it back to the committee. Ms. Sneddon.
Thank you, Chair. I think as this is recommended by our police chief, who's also a post commissioner, and recommended by the city attorney, and complies with Senate Bill 2, and particularly the statement that there will be no loss of coverage with the waterfront for all public safety, and that all parties have been consulted and informed, I can recommend the proposed changes to the ordinance of SBMC, section 17.08010 and 17.08.040, to reflect the changes of removal of peace officer designation and the carrying of firearms.
Thank you, Chair. I too, since this is coming as a recommendation from our police chief and our city attorney, I will support staff recommendation. I am a little worried though for the Harbor Patrol, just because now that concealed carry is more accessible, I'm just worried about their safety. But if police chief feels that it's not as big of a danger as I tend to overreact, so I'm taking a little step back. So I will recommend it to go to full council.
Can I call that a second?
Yes.
Thank you. So I'll support this too. I grilled you a little bit, and I'm just happy to say all the answers were really good. So, and I think, and it's probably the wrong phrase, but anytime you can assure me that you're carrying, that there's a method to not lose the level of services or what you're doing there, but at the same time demilitarize the front person that's there, if that's a good phrase to use, but I think that's a great thing. So I love it that almost every answer you had kind of centered on that, the new look, new feel, but we're doing all the same stuff except we just want to have that gun, taser, or handcuffs on our belt. So I think that'll be a huge improvement perception-wise, while losing little to nothing in terms of what the existing level of service is down there. So happy to see that. So if nobody else has any comments, Ms. Crisante, if you would run a vote for us.
Staff recommendation moved by Councilmember Snedden, second by Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez. Can we go ahead and vote, please? And the vote passes unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wiltshire and staff and chief.
Thank
So,
you, Chair and committee
Great
members.
presentation.
Yeah, it shouldn't.
Chair Jordan, can we, before we move on to the next item, can we just open up for general public comment? We didn't do that at the onset. So.
Like at the start of the meeting.
Hey, it's a full agenda
I
today.
never put that on my agenda. So we will open it for general public comment, not on any items.
Correct.
Yep.
So anybody who's listening online, if you would like to make a comment for items not on the agenda, please raise your hand within the app. Chair Jordan, we do not have anybody who
What
would
a
like to make
relief.
public comment.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Doimus. So, okay, on to the next item, Ms. Crisante.
Next item, subject, amending Chapter 22.70 of the Municipal Code regarding sign regulations and adding Chapter 22.71 pertaining to the murals onto private structures.
And that will be you, Mr. Doimus?
Yes, along with Deputy City Attorney Heather Minter is with me as well. I think the clicker might work, Heather, so I'll let you know if it does it. So, but Ms. Minter is also there at staff table to answer questions. So, what just happened? There we go. Okay, I got the clicker. Okay, thank you. So we're here to present amendments to the city sign ordinance and creation of a new chapter on public murals. So to just start, there's been no changes regarding the aesthetic requirements in our sign ordinances. We didn't do a deep dive in that. That would involve more community development, et cetera. This is just kind of a legal update to have what, number one, a very constitutionally sound and enforceable ordinance, because currently we do not have one. We wanted to amend outdated provisions in the ordinance. We also edited some unclear language and definitions or other aspects of the ordinance. Staff and applicants had difficult times in some, of these definitions. So we wanted to provide clarity into some of the troubleshooting areas we've come across over the years in terms of sign review. And then finally, we were taking murals, public murals, out of the sign ordinance, right? There should be a separate review process because murals are not signs. Now, the key is they are not to have a commercial message, we'll get to later. So it shouldn't be under that, at least that chapter, that purview. So what are the major effects of these changes? First, one of the most major effects we'll talk about is that there are no placement of any signs in the public, private signs in the public right-of-way. Government signs are held to a different standard, which I'll explain. So, for example, Public Works could still place signs in the city's public right-of-way. Another government agency, if needed, Caltrans could, but there are no private signs to be allowed. And signs have a broad-based definition, whether they're commercial signs, symbols, flags, etc. Number two, there's always been confusion whether A-frame signs can be enforced in the right-of-way. There have been. It has never been allowed to be there. We modernized the definition of like A-frame, sandwich board signs, and made it clear those can be immediately removed as well in the public right-of-way. And also bolstering the basis to do so in terms of blocking access, ADA access, et cetera. The biggest work product in terms of this change is the ordinance was littered with content-based inconsistencies, and we'll get into that. And so, based on case law, we had to remove a lot of those inconsistencies contained in the ordinance. We also made sure the sign committee, which reviews, along with staff, any applications of sign, they aren't reviewing content. It's strictly to the aesthetics of the sign, so that was another major change. And as I mentioned, murals are now their own chapter with their own review process. So how did we get here, right? You know, there were a case that I'll get into over a decade ago, and there was a major change for the push in terms of case law because our ordinance was outdated and many parts of it were unenforceable. There have been confusions and complaints about murals. What's a mural? What's a sign? You know, who decides to approve it or not, right? So we needed to provide clarity on that. Code enforcement has gotten complaints over signs, illegal signs, signs in the right-of-way, so we needed to deal with that. And then originally there was, when this case law came out 7, 8 years ago, there were like sign subcommittees, but that kind of organically wasn't involved, kind of dissolved. So we still, after 7 years later, we're here with an unenforceable sign ordinance. And we, you know, there was a sense of urgency with that. So the biggest impetus for this change in this work project was the Supreme Court case Reed versus Town of Gilbert. And in that case, it was dealing with a city in Arizona, city of Gilbert, which had different restrictions for religious service signs compared to political or ideology signs. And the court was looking at, well, why do you have these restrictions for religious service and not the same scrutiny, high level for ideological or political signs? And what was a compelling government interest to do so? And according to the court, the city could not produce so. And so they found that a violation of First Amendment. And so they said that they regulated those signs based on content. And you're not, you know, and you have to apply, if you're the government doing so, you have to apply strict scrutiny. There needs to be a really compelling, strong government interest. And when it comes to content, and that's the one thing to keep in mind when you're looking at this, to understand if an exception applies or what category fits, if you have to read the sign to understand it, that in itself is content. And so some examples of that, what we have in there in our current ordinance, right, is that temporary banner for grand opening, going out of business, is really popular. It's been the way things have been done for decades, but when you really think about that, to allow an exception for a large banner for a grand opening or going out of business to the exclusion of all other communicative speech, that's content-based. The same when it comes to temporary open house signs in the public right-of-way. We're not talking about in front of a house, but we're talking about in the city's property, the right-of-way. If you're allowing that to be okay, and there's an exception in the ordinance to do so, but at the exclusion of all others, again, that is content-based because you have to read the sign to understand the compliance of it. So what does this all mean when we're doing this review, right? We're no longer regulating, you know, based on the particular use of the sign, right? We can regulate still, though, just to be clear, on the districts in time, place, manner, right? So you can have different size requirements in a commercial versus residential, et cetera. But again, time, place, manner gets really strictly too, because you have to look at, is that within, can such regulation be content-based, which I'll get into in a second. And as I mentioned, whenever you're doing a sign regulation, you must apply this strict scrutiny because of the First Amendment being involved, right? So it must be narrowly tailored, and it must have a strong, compelling government interest with rational basis. And when you're looking at First Amendment, courts will look at alternative methods, or is there alternative ways that message can be still communicated, right? It doesn't mean the best message given, right? Are there alternative ways that can be communicated? So I'll get into that. And as I mentioned in the onset, why you could have government signs in the public right-of-way, the First Amendment doesn't apply, the Free Speech Clause doesn't apply to government speech. It applies when the government restricts private speech. So that's why a government entity has a right to speak for itself and put up, you know, in the public right-of-way, civic holidays or public safety signs, et cetera. So here are the changes we made based on the Reed case, right? So we added definitions of commercial speech and non-commercial speech. This also goes to help in terms of dealing with the murals, right, to make a clear distinction. We created an exemption for non-commercial signs, right, to allow it in commercial and non-commercial areas. And this is important because it kind of gives the right a person to put a sign up as long as they comply with other aspects without getting the ordinance, without getting a permit. Because if you do that uniformly, and it has to be on the property, right? And you have to get the permission of the tenant or owner themselves can do it. If you do that, it kind of evens the playing field because you're allowed that one sign. We obviously have a smaller dimension in residential versus commercial just for the aesthetic impacts, but that's the one distinction. You're allowed to do so. We made, and I'm sure we'll talk in detail about this, we moved the one exception right now currently the ordinance for the public right-of-way, allowing to have off-site open house signs. And if you know, we don't have any off-site billboards, anything else. We just have one exception currently for open house signs. We removed that exception based on the Reed case. There's no exception for large grand opening signs and banners, but now all businesses can put temporary window signs in that section. It goes with the section above I have bolded. It also doesn't have to now be, we're not regulating saying, oh, does it have to say grand opening or anything else, right? So it definitely frees up that First Amendment issue with these changes. Oops, sorry. And then we also now have made it clear, we continued on with no billboards, no off-premises signs. Besides that, no portable A-frame signs. We updated the definition of an obscene sign, right? So we discuss in terms of the penal code, right? Hate speech could be, protected. So there's always this question of, well, what is defined as obscene? We went with the state law on that. There could be, the perfect example of hate speech is, the Nazi symbol, right? And that, is protected in Supreme Court cases dealing all the way back to 1980 involving the village of Skokie, Illinois. So that is protected. Now, what is not protected is any speech that incites to violence, and we can enforce on that. Also, now the sign committee will not review anything regarding coming forward of a substitution of message. So if the sign remains the same, but the message has changed, that used to have to come back. That needs not to come back because you're reviewing content. In addition, with the sign committee review, we eliminated anything in there that related to content in the review. So the repetition and redundancy of messaging can be okay. That's a form of speech if you keep, maybe messaging 3 times the same message or same words, right? That's speech that we shouldn't be reviewing or commenting on. But the proliferation of signage, the amount of signage at a location, that is something the sign committee can comment on. And as you see there, I quote part of the new ordinance change, right? And where they are to review in a content-neutral manner, and their review is limited to a sign's physical attributes. Finally, we, as I mentioned in the onset, we made some additional changes to outdated language or cleared up definitions in terms of information signs, temporary signs, a civic event sign, an abandoned sign, which we needed to be placed in the ordinance. The current ordinance had updated, allowed non-conforming signs, and that means that signs that existed prior to the change to the ordinance. This ordinance does the same thing, and the reason for that is because you have to worry about a taking clause regarding non-conforming permanent signs, but it's still, if it's abandoned or illegal in terms of a safety or health issue, we can still enforce on that. And there was a whole bunch of language devoted in our current sign ordinance regarding an antiquated enforcement process in terms of liens and going to the county register. All that stuff was kind of taken out. Any enforcement fines, administrative fines based on recent case law will now, instead of being heard by an administrative hearing officer, will be reviewed by the sign committee, so that was an update. We also have a process now to remove an abandoned or unsafe signs. We can even do immediate removal if necessary and hold the sign. And so now I'll go into murals. So murals was contained as a definition of the sign ordinance, but it kind of really got lost in it. It really, I guess when you were reading it, you kind of were to follow the same review process as you would for any type of sign. So it just was mentioned briefly and got lost in terms of the provisions of 2270. So it needs its own distinct chapter because it really isn't a sign in terms of how we define it, right? So the definition is key there, right? It's defined as a visual art that does not contain any commercial message. And as I mentioned, it's no longer under the sign ordinance or part of that. It's a new chapter, 2271. And this is regarding murals on private commercial property within the city. The recommendation from staff is that the review body, instead of being the sign committee, be the city's arts advisory committee. This would require a new resolution to expand their authority, but that is one that staff recommends. It would also then require a presentation of work and train with the Arts Advisory Committee in terms of their purview and the findings they would have to make in their review. As with anything, right, the murals also must be content neutral as well. And in the review process, as I mentioned, there would be specific findings required. And it kind of is in line with how we have our design boards, except we don't have to worry about all the state housing laws compared to, because this is murals, right? That it first presents an innovative and unique artistic vision in terms of what's being proposed. It complements the design of the building that it's being placed on. The wall itself must be safe in terms of the integrity of it to hold such a mural, be able to have a mural. And again, it doesn't detract from the character of the surrounding neighborhood. So those would be the findings that would have to be made without any shot clock timings like we do for housing laws. And just so you know what led us up to today, we met twice with the sign committee on July 9th and August 6th. They unanimously approved forwarding the draft of this ordinance to the Ordinance Committee. They were supportive of understanding the enforcement issues of having the right-of-way clear of signs. Their edits they requested were making sure that any signs that are exempt from a permit still comply with all other requirements of the ordinance, which I thought was an excellent addition. Regarding commercial indoor signs, including neon, they wanted them at least 10 feet back from any window, I think, to resolve past issues. And then they are going to work with staff in creating an administrative guidelines on process and procedures regarding sign permitting and review that you really get into more detail and really are helpful for applicants in terms of making the process as clear as possible. We also met twice with the Santa Barbara Realtors Association recently to go over the issues in the right-of-way. And, you know, I've understood their points. I understand that this has been a traditional method of business, that the ordinance has created this exception for years. But that is also the issue of why we are here, why this ordinance is unenforceable. You know, it's very difficult to, it's basically an all or nothing proposition. We did look at some ordinances. They recommended one, Burbank, for example, that had a sign permitting requirements for open houses. But when I looked at different ordinances, they all were created in 2004. The Gilbert case came in 2015. So when you're looking at new sign ordinances that are doing revisions, they have these removals of having an exception. Because if you look at a real estate sign, right, that's content-based, and even the direction to it is content-based in terms of the commercial house that's being for open house. And so if you allow that, again, to the exclusion of all others, including billboards and you name it, that's where you have a content issue. That's where you come up with having a constitutional issue that will get shot down. And so that's why I've told enforcement staff that right now we have an issue regulating signs in the public right-of-way because we currently have that exception. You know, it's really, you know, when you look at it as well, if you look at tailoring times or certain periods of times, well, first of all, what business model are you tailoring that time for? What advantages I give? You know, other businesses may have a different tailoring time or different period they want to do. Second of all, you know, the administrative record in terms of the objections in creating these specific exemptions of allowing a certain period of times for 4 hours for any signs, you know, that could be viewed as content-based, just the administrative record, the legislative intent for those exemptions. And the final point, too, is, you know, it makes it very challenging for code enforcement. Right now, with the way the ordinance is, code enforcement is allowed to immediately remove the signs in the public right-of-way and store them for 90 days. If you start creating different exceptions, it causes immediate confusion. It makes it very difficult for our code enforcement. So our job, our task was to present, when we did this cleanup, is the most legally sound, defensible ordinance that would eliminate liability and it would make it able to be enforced. And so in meeting with them, we are always open to ideas and compromise, but this is one of those areas that's really, black and white when you look at it, in terms of there's really no shades of gray. In terms of next steps, we need to meet with the Arts Advisory Committee to talk about the new process on murals. We would need to create a resolution which would bring the council to give that purview to the Arts Advisory Committee. And then again, we would need to work on training on code enforcement with the new changes. We really haven't done much of enforcing on signs, again, because of this case that came out over about 10 years ago. So that would be a new step. And we would probably start with how council has always wanted it when we're making such drastic changes, is working on educating first and making the public aware, and then from that point, kind of starting the enforcement process, with a gentle touch at first, and then, accelerating if people are not obeying the requirements. And with that, Heather and I are open for any questions the committee may have.
Mr. Gutierrez.
Thank you, Chair Jordan. So where is this coming from? Has this been a growing issue, like, to public safety or the environment? Like, what was the cause of this becoming an issue for us to go over?
Sure. Chair Jordan, Councilmember Gutierrez, after the Gilbert case, our office brought attention to council about how our sign ordinance became unenforceable. And there were, some sign group workshops from the public, and, there were complaints about A-frame signs or signs in the public right-of-way that, we never enforced on. And so it was a long-standing promise to the city council that we would, make amendments to the sign ordinance. It never kind of got off the ground because there was always these, different priorities got in front of it, and the workshop kind of dissolved. So the goal was, look, we need to bring something. We promised for years, the community, we promised council that. And so we really kept it super hyper-focused. We just worked on the legal aspects of the ordinance, didn't touch anything aesthetically, and we also wanted to deal with murals because we used to hear issues or complaints or confusion on that. So I hope that gives some background of where it came from. But there isn't a super enforcement case that brought this forward.
Okay, are there any stipulations about the material that's being used that we could make a amendment? Essentially saying, we're not going to allow plastic yard signs, but biodegradable ones would be allowed, like something like that?
Chair Jordan, Councilman Gutierrez, no, in terms of at least the changes that are proposed here, there's no changes regarding the murals. It was just to make sure that we're not regulating or creating exceptions based on content, nothing in terms of, it is very possible. That's not a First Amendment issue to, again, that goes to aesthetics and all that. That is something that could be a definite possibility, but that wasn't the scope of the changes here.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Sneddon?
Thank you, Chair Jordan. So I have a couple of questions. So one, I just want to clarify this. So on my own property, not in the public right-of-way, am I allowed to put up a sign with whatever message I want, unless it's inciting violence?
Chair Jordan, Councilmember Sneddon, correct, unless it's obscene, defined as obscene in the penal code or inciting violence. And, that gets kind of like viewed as a catch-all provision, right, to truly capture some of the inconsistencies. And the key there, too, as you mentioned, it's your own property, not the public right-of-way.
And could I also put up a sign on my own property saying for sale or for rent or anything?
Chair Jordan, Councilmember Sneddon, yes, and that's why you can also have, and when we're talking about alternative channels of communication, that's why you could have a real estate sign on the property itself, and that's what a court would look at. You could also have internet listings too. So the court would look at us as saying, look, you don't need a sign in the public right of way. There is no compelling interest. You have alternative channels of communication to do so, and you as a private individual can do so on those things.
Thank you. And then I have a question about in the public right of way, not just real estate signs, but directional signs. So say parking for the bowl events, or a nonprofit is having a fundraiser and putting an arrow saying, keep going this direction, or really particular neighborhood associations a lot of times. I'm thinking of like Eucalyptus Hill Association meetings or something like that, where people are trying to figure out where to go, and there's a sign that says, you know, keep going that way. So if it's directional, can there be exemptions for that? If it's
So-
temporary, event-specific, directional?
Chair Jordan, Councilmember Sutton, that's an excellent question, right? And on the onset, when you ask that question, it doesn't sound like it's content-based, but it actually is content-based, right? It's directional to an event, right? So inherently, it is content-based. And the League of Cities, the California cities have done like a wonderful paper and reviews on those things, and they even mentioned that. Now, the directional signs you're allowed is, for example, the city placing a directional sign there. But when it comes to a private association saying, you know, arrow this way or 2 blocks down to this event, that in itself is a content-based, because you still have to read the sign to understand if the content, so it's not necessarily have to be like 100% commercial, but in that, there's still kind of a laden commercial hint to it too as well.
So even a neighborhood association would be considered commercial-ish?
Correct. It would
Okay.
be.
And then what about lost cat?
Again, you know, that would be in the public right-of-way, not permitted. So it sounds very harsh, but again, to have an unenforceable, you know, ordinance, I mean, enforceable ordinance, that would have to be, that provision would have to be there.
Okay, and then what was the year that you said, before, after?
The Gilbert case came out in 2015.
2015?
2015.
Okay, so this is, I'm only just looking at this now, or I would have asked you this ahead of
Sure.
time. So I'm just
No problem.
prefacing that. So I was just looking at, and I wouldn't want you to opine on another city's ordinance, whether it's legal or not, but it just, so I was looking up different ones that allow it or don't in California, and the city of Rancho Palos Verdes, and their code was 11/16/21. And they say signs in the public property prohibited except for temporary signs, and then they go on to say A-frame, they could be A-frame, they could be in the parkways but not medians, no taller than 36 inches, 5 feet squared, no flags, balloons, attachments, don't block ingress, egress, not impair the motorist view, and then they do have temporal place between 11 a.m. and 6 p.m., weekdays, 9 a.m., 6 p.m., weekends, no advertisements for services or goods, and then I would add, does not impede accessible passageway. And again, I wouldn't ask you to opine on their municipal codes or when they passed them, but I'm wondering if we could look into that more, possibilities with other areas that have codes that are written after the 2015.
Sure. Chair Jordan, Councilmember Sutton, you know, that was one of the things that Ms. Minter and I started looking at some other cities. Just from the onset, there are things that ordinance has that would give me pause. There are some things, again, like when you're doing it, as I mentioned, the issue with the cat signs, the issue with directional signs, it sounds harsh, but that's the trigger. When you start making these little exceptions, well, it's this, then someone comes and challenges, and then how come that speech is more important, or why does that speech have a stronger compelling government interest than my speech, right? And we're getting into that issue. The difficulty in having some signs regarding, you know, hours or all that, what are the hours in particular of, right? You know, are they just on a Sunday and Saturday that basically, you know, are kind of geared towards one business? Or are they a consistent thing every day from this period of time, right? That's one thing to do. But when you start doing that, then you're making a mess for code enforcement. So that's the balance they have there. So there are things you can take from what you read to me that I think there could be something that could be content neutral based that goes a time planner, but on the flip side, then you're creating this heavy burden on staff and code enforcement on that.
Okay, thank you. And then I have another question about murals. Part of the description was about the character of a neighborhood or area.
Correct.
And so something like the funk zone, for instance, and again, not to make like determinations about the funk zone murals, but the character of that area was different before the murals, and now that there are murals, that's become sort of part of the character of the area. How do we make those distinctions? Like the first mural is different from the character that it was, but now that there are murals, it's sort of part of the character, so, yeah.
Absolutely, Chair Jordan, Councilmember Simon. I think those murals that are there, that's a great example. Those murals are there, go into part of the determination. The fact that they exist there, and they're kind of visible, it's almost part of that character, that neighborhood character. So it'd be a different, probably, they would probably have it, they would view it, at least the Arts Advisory Committee, differently versus if you had it like in a historic district or near there, right? So, and when we would do that, there's still a lot of heavy lifting for murals, right? The first step is kind of getting the major findings that you would want. And doesn't mean, there could be some amendments to that point too, but the first part is getting the right body to review it. Second is all having these kind of traditional findings you would want. And then it would be developing, like you have for the design boards, policies and procedures that even go deeper in terms of providing even greater guidance to applicants, artists, and the board. And so, yeah, each neighborhood could be distinct, and a mural maybe that wouldn't meet the findings in one neighborhood would meet the findings in the funk zone.
And would those decisions be appealable or not in the way that we have it framed out here?
It could be appealable to the city council.
I mean, just in case there was the entire side of the Paseo Nuevo building is
Correct.
one mural that we might not agree with, but
Yep.
Arts Committee said that was great, something like that.
It could be, yep, correct.
Okay.
We give it a level of appeal.
Thank you.
Mr. Gutierrez.
Thank you, Chair. Again, just to reiterate, so as my colleague, Councilmember Sneddon said, like a lost cat sign, like yard sale sign, car wash signs, like all those would all be affected by this?
By the placement of the public right of way, Chair Jordan, Councilmember Gutierrez, yes, the idea is basically to have the safest legal ordinance is kind of an all or nothing. Like in the public right of way is clear of the placement of any signs, flags, symbol, anything, and just the only allowance is the government signs. If you make exceptions on content, that'll get struck down once you start doing that. If you start creating some parameters regarding time and location, but don't make exceptions to content, you're getting in a safer area. The trade-off with that is the difficulty on enforcement. So that's the balance you have. So you can't make exceptions to what the sign says, but you can do so on time and location. That time and location, when you're considering it, needs to really not be geared to one particular group, but interests citywide, right? Because that, it has to be free from a challenge of saying, well, this time and location restrictions really for the purposeful benefit of one, right? And when you do that, you can do so, but then you're able to at least do it that regard, but then again, you make enforcement a challenge. So the goal, at least in the staff, what we want to provide is the highest limit, strongest ordinance we could provide to you today.
Thank you.
Ms. Sneddon?
Thank you for the latitude, Chair Jordan. Just one follow-up question to that. So for public safety and things like that, and I'm just putting aside the real estate signs at all, but things like lost cat, yard sale, neighborhood association, neighborhood safety meeting, those are things that I think you maybe could say were in, the public good. Mm-hmm. And could a neighborhood have, or could we designate, a post in a neighborhood that is like, in this post for neighborhood communications, it's okay to put your lost cat sign up here. Would that be something?
It's an excellent question, Chair Jordan, Councilmember Sneddon. You like I said, when it comes to time, place, manner, you could designate a part in the public right of way. You could designate, because right now it's unfettered in the public right of way, right? Mm-hmm. This is a ban completely, except real estate signs, open house signs can be placed anywhere in the public right of way. You could designate specific areas in there, but when you do so, you don't want to make it content based. But your examples do raise one point, right? There's a much stronger compelling government interest when someone is putting a sign for a public safety reason or a lost cat versus a commercial enterprise. So that could be, a further analysis and looking to that specific example, because as a lawyer in me, I'd rather argue in front of a court a compelling interest of a cat missing or a public safety meeting, right? A neighborhood watch meeting, much stronger compelling interest potentially under strict scrutiny versus a commercial enterprise, right? So that would be something that is potentially something that could be looked at in a very astute question, for sure.
I appreciate that. I know in my neighborhood, there's one particular wooden post, that's where those notices go, and I know a lot of families and people really appreciate seeing those notices, so thank you for that.
I don't understand that answer, John, if you'd help me with that. So
Sure.
you could or could not put a kiosk on public property in neighborhood locations that would serve as totally a free speech location open to content?
That's exactly what, Chair Jordan, you kind of answered it. When it comes to time, place, manner restrictions, you could designate an area,
Okay.
right? But that has to be kind of unfettered, we're not worrying about, besides inciting violence or penal code, that's,
Right.
it could be,
Okay.
commercial or lost cat. And then the other point I was making to Councilmember Sutton too is, when you're looking at content, right, you can still look at compelling government interests, and there's a stronger at least argument that we could look at for those in terms of compelling government interests of a lost pet to reunite them with a pet owner, or a true public safety issue versus a commercial issue.
From an enforcement standpoint, but I'm sure you don't want to defend against that, right? Because that's
Of
still.
course.
Right. Public property leased to a third party. How do you handle that? So I'll just give you an example. At the top of the bottom steps at the Maritime Museum, a sandwich board saying, go to Dart Coffee, go to Anchor Rose. It's on public property, but we're the landlord to a tenant.
So if it's on public property, if a landlord to the tenant doesn't matter, it would be not allowed, where you would put it, because that's still not government speech, it's still like commercial in that regard. Where a sandwich board could be placed is on the property owner's property, but if it's anywhere in the public right of way, and that hasn't changed. That's just clarifying language. We see a proliferation of them in town, but we've never allowed them to be placed, a frame or sandwich board signs to be placed in the
On
public right of way.
property that they lease.
No, even if they lease, if it's on their property, they can do so.
No, I'm sorry, on public property.
Property,
that
they cannot,
lease.
yeah.
Okay. And then tell me about the outreach meetings you had at the Association of Realtors.
Sure.
What did that look like? Who was in the room? How many people? That kind of thing.
Sure. It was, thank you, Chair Jordan. It was 2 meetings, and they reached out, and they were inquired, they saw this change, and they didn't ask why we did not meet with them, which we were very apologetic. We should have met with them prior to that. We were just looking at changing cleanup, but I understand the impact right now because of what the ordinance currently has. And so we had 2 meetings via Zoom with Ms. Minter and myself and the president of the Santa Barbara Real Estate Association. And I apologize if I forgot your name currently, but it was a discussion. They presented Burbank, some other ordinances. We did banter about the possibility of these kind of exceptions, and that's why I wanted a second meeting, because I wanted to kind of think over and have Ms. Minter and I do some research on that issue too. And Burbank, for example, we looked at, well, they have this permit program for open signs, but again, we found that to be 2004, 11 years prior to the Reed decision. We don't know if they even enforce that or not. I wouldn't recommend having such an exception for one that's content-based in itself. We did look at potential time blocks, right? But then again, that has to be more general versus really, when you look at it, it's really geared on a Sunday or a Saturday afternoon, right? Because that's where you get in trouble. And after that conversation, at least our collective thought, Ms. Minter and I, is like, our job is, look, here we'll present at least the most defensible ordinance, and then we'll have Ordinance Committee chip away.
But specifically, you met with 2 or 3 people.
2 or 3 people. yes,
Okay,
yes.
so you haven't had an outreach meeting with a room full of people?
I have not. I love
Okay.
those, but I have not
All
had
right.
it.
And then, I don't even understand the mural section. I can't make I cannot not make a connection in my mind between the word art and content.
Mhm.
And so you're defining it as visual art, but it says it must be content neutral. I would challenge you to walk around town with me and look at every mural that exists and tell me of a successful one where there is no content.
So-
I mean, the most obvious would be the side of Brownie's Market or the side of the dance place my kids go to. Thank you, one of my kids. EOS that both have George Floyd murals on them. But even other ones that are just designs of a long ago cultural, historical type of group of people, those are I think they're content-based when you learn about the history and the place of what they're portraying. So how does any piece of visual art like that be not content?
So that's an excellent question. The parameters we're placing on the Arts Advisory Committee is they must remain content neutral, right? So they can't look at, well, we don't like this artistic messaging, whether it be the George Floyd mural, right? Or the other examples you give, because those are exactly all content-based. They're not looking at the artistic messaging of the sign. They're looking at the aesthetics, right? And then what it doesn't constitute a mural is when you get commercial, right? So no, when they're making their findings, or they shouldn't be pushing an agenda on the artist of like, we're not going to accept it because of the content. They are looking at the artistic quality of it. They're looking at the matching surrounding neighborhood. They're looking at the integrity of the wall. That's the stuff they're looking at. They're not going to be.
Back up,
Huh?
because you're saying the mural in the ordinance must be content neutral. So the mural itself must be content neutral, regardless of what the sign committee is, or the Arts Advisory Committee is looking at.
No, the review must be content neutral. Sorry if there's any confusion.
Okay.
The review should be content neutral.
Okay, all right,
That's
that's just
an
one
excellent
bullet
question.
point
Yes,
there.
correct.
So a mural could have content.
Murals most definitely
Okay,
could.
because you'd be hard pressed to
And will
find
have
the other
content,
way, right?
correct.
Okay. And what happens to those in place right now? Would they have to go through a review program to meet these new parameters, or could they stay in place?
Those would be grandfathered in
Okay.
as non-conforming.
All right, thank you. I didn't clear you, did I? You're good? No. Okay. You do? Yeah. Oh, Mr. Gutierrez.
Thank you, Chair Jordan. I just want to ask City Administrator McAdoo, from her experience of working in other cities, what's your thought about this ordinance and how other cities you've worked for have dealt with it?
I think this ordinance is important in terms of compliance with the Supreme Court decision. So in terms of the temporary A-frame signs, I will say that I think Santa Barbara's sign ordinance is much more restrictive and than many I've seen in other cities. A lot of other cities don't even have sign review committees or anything to that nature. So as Assistant City Attorney Doimus indicated, this is the most conservative approach. If you would like, I mean, we could go back and try to figure out if there's other ways, looking at other cities in more depth with ordinances that have been updated since the Supreme Court decision. I do think the mural art program is something that is good to be pulled out of the sign ordinance because, murals, I actually think we should probably look at it a little bit further and even think about creating some templates for property owners, because murals are protected under a different federal act, which is VARA, which is the Visual Artists Recognition Act. And so public art then becomes, it's protected speech in a different way. In other cities that I've worked in, the property owner, there's agreements with the artist so that if there is an issue in the future with either maintenance events or content, there's an ability to remove those murals, because otherwise, if you don't have those agreements in place, you can't ever remove art. And so I think those are some other things that we might want to look at in terms of requirements of if people are going to be putting public murals up, because sometimes themes and content changes over time and the acceptance of that, and so the ability to have some ability to modify those. But I mean, I think we are happy to go back and take a look at the sign ordinance, but I do think, you know, Santa Barbara, for a lot of reasons, has more restrictions on signs than probably other communities, and I think there's some good history and reasons for that. But we're happy to look at that further if you'd like us to.
Thank you for that.
All right, let's move to public comment. Ms. Crescente? So we'll do 3 minutes.
3 minutes.
And if there's anybody lurking online that wants to comment, also now would be the time to get their hand up so we can manage this.
Thank
Go
you,
ahead.
Chair Jordan. Our first speaker is going to be Brian Johnson.
Good afternoon, Chair Jordan, Councilmember Sneddon and Gutierrez. Thank you so much. My name is Brian Johnson. I'm the CEO of the Santa Barbara Association of Realtors. We represent approximately 1,300 Realtor members and approximately 1,700 members of the MLS in the area. I come to speak in opposition of the ordinance as it's written today. We have spoken with Staff Attorney Doimus on a couple of occasions. We feel like that there is more that could be done with the ordinance to make exceptions for open house signs. We believe that there are many cities around the state that have crafted, I think, defendable ordinances that include options for time, place, certain time and date, certain situations. We also feel that this is an important issue to our members and to the city in itself, because this is an economic driver for the city, residential sales and rentals. The open house signs aren't just used for home sales, but they're also used to assist people that are going to open homes for renting. We also believe that there could be a government interest in place here because of fair housing and not discriminating against someone who maybe doesn't have access to the internet to know how to find directions to a house, or maybe someone that's not necessarily comfortable with technology. But with all of that being said, I want to speak to say that I understand where you're coming from, and we understand the history of this. We understand the Supreme Court decision. We believe that with the previous council-approved committee, that we were working towards something that would have had, I think, some good solutions that would have been defendable. We would like to maybe return to those discussions if possible. But at the end of the day, you've received our letter. You understand our position on it. We have some members here today that would like to speak on it as well, so I don't want to take up too much of your time. But thank you for your thoughtful discussions today, your thoughtful questions. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Isaac Garrett.
Good afternoon, Chairman Jordan and Committee Member Gutierrez, Committee Member Sneddon. I, too, am a Realtor here in Santa Barbara, a member of the Santa Barbara Association of Realtors, and I, too, speak against the ordinance as it is proposed. We believe that signs, if they are strategically placed, will not be a safety factor. We also believe that the signs placed could also save time, gas, and convenience. As you may know, that there are barriers in many of the intersections throughout this city. And I have lived here since 1960. There was a time to where I could go from one end of the city to the other and know exactly where to turn and when to turn and how to turn. Today, you cannot do that. Your GPS system is basically useless here now. And so the signs plays a major role in directing people specifically to certain areas. I know sometimes when I'm on caravan, going to different houses to preview, You get to an intersection, if there's a directional sign, you know whether to go right or whether to go left. If there is no sign, sometimes you make the wrong turn, you say, okay, well, I'll turn and go around the block. Get to the end of the block, you can't because it's a one-way street. You can't go that way. So you got to go an additional 2 blocks, make the right turn, look at the gas that you burned, the time you lose, and the pollution you created, you know. So we believe that there is a way to deal with this without totally banning the sign position. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Miguel Avila.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, council members, staff. My name is Miguel Avila. I am very proud to say I'm a realtor in Santa Barbara, member of the Santa Barbara Association, Ventura County, and the North County. 51 years member of this beautiful, wonderful paradise. I'm member of a number of nonprofits, especially the Greater Santa Barbara Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, co-founder, president. I'm used to coming here to speak in behalf of small businesses, perhaps rental issue or something. But in my 20th year as a realtor, this is the first time that I hear about something like this. And, you know, I look at myself, how many deals I've done, very active. I'm very proud to say that I'm a very active realtor, working from Oxnard, Camarillo, Santa Paula, all the way up to Lompoc and Santa Barbara. And this is the only city that I hear something like this, the only city. And I do a lot of networking with other fellow realtors in other cities, Bakersfield, Paso Robles, and no one had ever mentioned something like this. I never thought. You know, our beautiful, good-looking, silent salesmen on the sidewalks once, twice a week, perhaps 3 times if one day is a broker's open. They help us sell houses, and you probably don't even have an idea how much employment those silent salesmen help us generate in Santa Barbara and wherever we do business. I mean, just run your imagination. House cleaners, home inspectors, roofers, escrow officers, photographers. I mean, just it goes on and on and on and on. And this ordinance will definitely not work. It will work completely against us, totally against us. You know, I urge you to rethink, to come up with, work with us, with the Santa Barbara Association of Realtors, with all of us, to come up with a different alternative. But please don't help us, don't remove this part of our job that we do, our business. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Don Catch.
Good afternoon, council members. Thank you for your time and your service to our community. I've taken a higher view of this issue before us, and that is I am a realtor, but for 30 years I was in the media. So for me, the First Amendment is significantly a higher issue than commercial advantage. So I think if we look at the Gilbert case, and the reason for the Supreme Court ruling was to protect free speech, not to ban it. I also served on the subcommittee years ago with the prior city attorney, where we found various alternatives in reaction to the Gilbert hearing. And we spent over a year meeting regularly trying to come up with something that would work and save the First Amendment. And I would encourage council and city administrator to look at that option of renewing that possibility, to look at viable options. Because I don't think the spirit of the Gilbert case was to ban free speech in an effort to save free speech. And I think it's beneath this progressiveness of the city of Santa Barbara to make banning free speech the solution. Thank you.
Next speaker is Laurel Abbott.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for what you're doing for our great city. I'm so excited to be back here talking about this again. We worked really well together last time to get parameters that we should all be able to work with. We educated our realtor community on right-of-way, access, everything that we would need to do in order to make this work for everyone, and what the complaints that you guys have to deal with all the time. We all understand that you've got to answer to so many people. There is a traffic safety issue. Do you know how bad realtors drive? Do you know how hard it is when they can't find the house and they're backing up? If we can help them get there, if we can help the public not be so confused. This practice has been in place since the beginning of real estate to get people into houses so they can pursue their dreams of homeownership. If there's no signs, people are just gonna be wandering around neighborhoods and awkwardly walking into houses who probably aren't even open. It's just a practice that people are used to. It's a service. It's a business practice that we have to preserve to keep doing our jobs. And the public is not going to understand this high-end ruling. They're just going to go, where's the house? And park in the wrong street. Imagine trying to find a house in the Riviera and flying by it 15 times, then turning around in some guy's driveway. You know, it's a practical issue. It's not black and white. This isn't theory. This is practice. Please help us keep our jobs. Thank you.
Next speaker is Helen Larson. She's gone. And our final speaker will be Jeff Rue. Jeff.
Good afternoon, council members, and thank you for your service. So I'm a realtor in town, and we're concerned about having our signs not being able to be available to direct people to the places that we have open houses. So like many other businesses, we rely on signs for education, direction, and in some of the city streets, they are not able to be gotten to on GPS, and signs actually allow and help us guide people to those open houses. You know, we provide a service for our citizens. It's not always an easy service, but it's something that we do, and we love what we do. And we're just asking for some help here, that we get some assistance in not having our signs disallowed. And I know agents in town are generally very conscious of public property, keeping them out of the right-of-way, keeping them out of sidewalks. You know, we want to just be able to inform and have people come to those open houses. Thank you.
Chair Jordan, no further speakers, not online.
Thank you. So it's to the committee, Ms. Snedden.
Thank you, Chair Jordan, and thank you to the speakers and to the, I think it's probably about 200 emails we've received, so very effective getting people to write in. I just want to take a little bit of a different tact on this, and I will have some questions here. So really, thank you for presenting the most defensible ordinance. I mean, that's what we expect of our city attorney's office, and also acknowledging that the ordinance committee might want to make adjustments or ask about adjustments. So I think that's part of what we do here. So I think in that spirit, I think it would be a good idea to review other city ordinances, such as, but not modeling after, but the Rancho Palos Verdes one comes to mind because it was after the 2015 Reed decision. So just really double check for what might also be defensible. I would also recommend more targeted meetings with the Santa Barbara Association of Realtors, just in the spirit of collaboration, to really just make sure we're checking everything. I would like to review designated spaces in neighborhoods for notices related to the public, so lost cat, yard sale, neighborhood safety meetings. Not a kiosk or anything that pronounced, but maybe just this post in this neighborhood is where you can put signs. But on another note, and I think this might be worth pursuing the direction that I think of open house signs in my neighborhood, which there are often many, as informational to the neighbors, almost like a notice of development sign. It's a notification that you may be having new neighbors, that something may be being marketed as a vacation rental, to keep an eye out for that. It's also, I always go to the open houses in my neighborhood because I want to see from that house across the street, what's the line of sight to my property? What's the line of sight into my backyard? What is the fire safety at this property? Are they doing defensible space? Also for ideas of what more I could be doing. So I do think there's an informational component to a neighborhood that is valuable. For instance, it's how I knew in my neighborhood that probably 7 of the houses on my block were vacation rentals, because that's how they were being sold, that's how they were being marketed, and then I could keep an eye on that in a different way. So I think it's worth looking into. It's not so much defending the ability to sell something or to market something, but more as a notice to a neighborhood when multiple places are for sale or not. It's also an indication, when you're driving around town, there have been different periods of time when there's so many signs up, and there is an informational component to that of what's happening in the public for families leaving town or relocating. So that's something I think just might be worth looking at in that way. I'm not sure if that's defensible, not defensible, but aside from the ability for one industry to be able to market what they're selling, I really do appreciate actually the signs going up when I can know in my neighborhood and around town what's for sale. On the mural note, I have a question. So and again, if you can't, opine on this particular mural, but on the side of Jimmy's, or what was Jimmy's, but there's the dragon, Year of the Dragon mural. That's beautiful, done by artists with a very specific intent. Anecdotally, I've heard a lot of people want it to stay, but our current ordinances say this was a temporary mural through a different way. My question is in this ordinance, with how it's updated for murals, would there be a route for an application for a mural such as that to apply to stay? Not that one specifically, because I don't want to make a decision on that one.
No, Chair Jordan, Councilmember Sneddon. It's an interesting question because one, Ms. McAdoo mentioned a very fair point, because this is a work of art, right? First of all, to remove it, there's the federal law, right, that could preempt the issue in terms of, the city being able to force a removal because you need the permission of the artist. And second of all, with this new mural enactment of law, that we would view the murals too as well as kind of non-conforming, at least non-conforming in the sense they never went before the new process, and so they would stay. What the new ordinance does do, though, it makes the artist, the owner of it, responsible for the upkeep. So it can't fade. They need to make it. They need to make the condition appropriate. So that's one thing I think this ordinance does, where it balances the federal law, and also, and even that would even apply to previous murals that existed, prior to this, future potential ordinance enactment, that you would still need to have the upkeep component. So there are many reasons right there to answer your question. It would stay based on that.
Thank
But
you.
upkeep for any mural would be also a required element that I think we need in an ordinance.
So that raises another question, actually, and thank you for that. For the upkeep, what if the muralist passes away or the mural is done by a team of muralists under an umbrella organization? Or could it be whoever commissioned the mural to be charged with the upkeep? Or that upkeep raises an interesting
Sure.
question.
The upkeep could be it would generally be the responsibility of the owner, the property owner. So if it transferred to a new property owner, it would be their responsibility, so.
So then,
And don't forget, it's also in a private area too. So if that private owner did not want that mural there any longer, they could remove it. It just would
Okay.
make it difficult for the city, our end, to have. the
to
removal.
force the
Correct.
removal.
Correct.
So then would that apply to, say, Ortega Park murals? That's city property.
Yeah, there's several issues there. There'd be the federal law, there also would be, and then we would be working with the artists in terms of upkeep or, working on them commissioning too, because upkeep's not just taking a brush, there's special delicateness to it, so.
Right.
That's what would be they'd be responsible for it. And I think a lot of the mentions by the committee today, a lot of those even firm details would be in terms of guidelines. That wouldn't be codified necessarily in the ordinance.
And could another entity take up the issue of upkeep? So say the city decided something was historic landmark or something worth preserving over generations, say, could we make an agreement about who is in charge of the upkeep?
Because it's private, the application, it would revert to the property owner, so they would eventually do it, but the application, the process would contain the responsible entity, for sure.
Okay. Thank you. So then those were questions, but to go back to, I would be prepared to pass most of this, and it's a much needed, long time coming updates to this ordinance. But I think in terms of the public spaces for, designated public spaces for neighborhood information, looking at temporal directional signs, and again, not just for real estate, but I am thinking about neighborhood association meetings or nonprofit events or things that direct people where to go, might have a safety component of keeping people out of neighborhoods, or, mention the Riviera. A lot of those streets are dead ends, and it's difficult. So I can see directional signs as being for the public good.
And this is really helpful because, as you know, the ordinance committee report is it's 6 pages. It covers the entire ordinance. So the next time we would come forth, it'd be a much focused kind of term paper on these issues. So
Okay,
not a
so this
problem.
is a first pass?
Sure.
Okay, so then as a first pass, those would be my recommendations then to also meet with the Santa Barbara Association of Realtors and look at a handful of other ordinances that were post 2015. And thank you for your thoroughness.
Mr. Gutierrez.
Thank you, Chair Jordan. Thank you, staff, and thank you for everyone that's participated in giving their opinion about this issue. I too can't forward this to full council the way that it is. I want to make sure that we meet with the Board of Realtors to get their input, because it kind of does seem that it's more or less going to affect them the most. And oddly enough, from my time on council, I haven't heard any complaints about realtor signs as I heard about other signs that block the right-of-way. So, and to be honest, it's mainly around the State Street area that I've gotten complaints about. And it's not really about areas around town, and in particular, not realtor signs. And I'm worried about how this could affect just businesses overall, the unintended consequences of passing something like this the way that it is now. And if the public does have an issue with signs that aren't properly placed, you can report it to the city using the SB Connect app. You can actually take a picture, pinpoint it on a map, and city staff will respond to it. I am in favor of having the mural element of this be taken out and have it be sent to the Arts Committee, because that is one thing I've heard several times from residents, is that they would like to see more murals around town, but that the process is very difficult to do that. So I hope that in doing this, it'll make it a lot more easier to get those murals up around town to make our city a little more beautiful. So the other thing I'm willing to discuss with the realtors and other businesses is to just make sure that the signs are biodegradable and environmentally friendly, because yeah, the plastic just kind of bothers me, because as far as I know, they're not really recyclable. So yeah, just to add that to the discussion would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
I'm agreeable to most of that, but I'll lower expectations. Really, my stance on this is I'd just like to see more work done on the outreach process, particularly make it our outreach rather than their outreach. So I'm envisioning more of a bite the bullet and do something like in Gebhard, where we're hosting the outreach and explaining the legalities of the stance, listening to the responses, answering those responses. The way it's happened, the way you've explained it's happened up to now is you're passing a pretty non-acceptable process onto people whose job it is to defend the process they have to their organization. And so I'd like to give the organization people a chance to sit in the room and hear the reasoning and make their responses and hear our responses back and work around that. And then after that, you can do your peer level to peer level talk some more. So I would agree too that it's not ready to leave ordinance, that the comments you've heard plus that part of the outreach type of thing should occur and bring it back. And then I ton of stuff to read this week, maybe, right? So I'm not really conversant on the mural part yet, and I want to get more conversant before we let go of this, because once it gets to council, then I get less time to talk or worry about things. But I see murals as a essential little relief from the rest that Santa Barbara is historically, in terms of look and feel. And they're just like, if there's a soul within a soul that jumps out and surprises you, that's a mural. And so I want to really, I want to really make sure I understand what the consequences are and what the consequences aren't. And if there's consequences that I don't like, I get an opportunity to address those. And I'm not ready to do that today. I couldn't tell you.
And if I may, I totally appreciate that. And one thing this will allow is, like as I mentioned, I haven't had an opportunity because I wanted to test the temperature if the Arts Advisory Committee would be the appropriate one, not to throw, since you're throwing monkey wrenches in this direction, I'll throw one back at the committee in the sense of this regard. Is the Arts Advisory Committee, there could also be a possibility we create an own mural committee, right? Doesn't necessarily have to be one too. So that's something I will, create a possibility of and give an option next time for the committee to vote on, decide on what that looks like. It may not be that, I may appear before them and, there may not be interest or looking at this. Maybe there just needs to be a separate new committee off this too. So that's a possibility to think about too in advance of our next meeting as well, and something I'll present as well.
Okay, and then I also like the suggestions on looking for a way to have a multiple neighborhood-centric placements where you could just have free speech run amok. So whether that's a kiosk, a pole,
Basically a
flat
public
thing.
right-of-way free speech zone, as I
Yeah,
understand.
so I agree that, that will actually help with the part that you are outlining, which would be just a cat sign on the post or whatever, not that. And then appealable to someone, I think, would be great. And so I'll leave that, whether that's council or planning commission, because it is sort of a land use kind of thing. But
Right now I have it to council.
Yeah, but whatever that would be, I think there's plenty of opportunity here for disagreement, and it should be resolvable at some higher level. And then, just as an informational item, the examples that get brought up by the Realtor organization of, oh, they do this here, they do this there. We're Santa Barbara. I say that all the time at home and get slapped, right? But we're not in a good way, Santa Barbara. We're ripe for litigation. I mean, just pick something. Sit and lie ordinance that we're $750,000 into trying to defend. We pick up a guy's trash that he called art on State Street. That's $250,000. I mean, it's just, there are people who are looking for an opportunity to chase us. And bless your hearts, you're not saying we'll stand up and hold you harmless and indemnify you. So it's part of the duty sitting up here is to really worry about that. And I will just tell you, the elephant in the room that we're not talking about is exactly the type of situation that worries me, of chasing us down and punishing us in court in front of the right kind of judge. So they're just, again, back to that expectations thing. I'm willing to put Mr. Doimus in front of the crazy animals and let them yell at him, talk to him, get responses, and give it our best shot. But as far as expectations go, I think unless something else comes to light structurally at the end of the day, it's, as he said, it's an all or nothing type of decision because nothing else is really defensible. So we gave a list of things we'd like included. Do you need a motion to send you on your way and tell you to bring back, or would it just be per our comments today?
Chair Jordan, it could be either or. You can make a motion just to, based on, you can, if you want to make specific points and have a motion of what you want me to do, and then to continue the item for another time, absolutely is fine. Either
Take
or.
a shot at it? Okay.
I'll make a first pass and then see if we can include other things too. So I would make a motion to continue this item with considerations of noticing for public good in the public right-of-way in specified areas for things such as neighborhood safety or informational items. I would like to include looking at signs as informational, so similar to notice of development in a neighborhood, and if there may be some signs that either temporal, directional, informational, that pertain to a neighborhood might be allowed. I would look to continue to look at the murals and advise that it go to the Arts Committee for input, but that we also look at forming possibly a new committee or review body with those decisions being appealable. And would like to include Councilmember Gutierrez's suggestion that sign materials be considered in terms of environmental impact, and recommendation to meet with the Santa Barbara Association of Realtors and others on looking at if there are other considerations that we could look at.
So I'll add the specific, not informational, but free speech locations on public property in neighborhoods. So it's not just a temporary informational, it's a standing, continuing free speech location.
We could make that change, just make it a change to the, yeah.
Is there anything else? What? Oh, I'm checking to make sure there's no other items.
No, I think that's good.
Okay, why don't you take a shot at it, Nicole?
So the motion will be to continue this item with consideration of noticing of public good in the public right-of-way in specified areas include looking at signs that are informational, look at the murals, and advise to go to Arts Advisory for input, also forming a new committee with those decisions being appealable, and that the sign materials be considered for environmental impacts, and more targeted meetings with the SB Association of Realtors, and then also a free speech location that would be permanent.
Okay, does that work?
Thank you. I might just change that, we can just change the noticing, instead of saying noticing for public good, it could say noticing of free speech. Then it doesn't need to be a separate item. And then I meant to make note, there was something else you said in there. Oh, a consideration of a new committee concerning murals. I just want to make sure that that's,
Considering it,
yeah.
forming a new
Does that?
Mr. Gutierrez.
I'm sorry?
Thank you. I just have a comment. I'm willing to vote to move this forward, the recommendations to bring it back. But just going to say, I think the free speech locations is just not a good idea, but I'm just throwing that out there. Because when I think free speech.
I would also echo that. We'll look
Yeah.
into that a little bit. I was just actually emailing with the city attorneys. I think there's some pitfalls with that, just because if it's free speech for one, it's free speech for
Right.
all, even groups
Yeah.
we may not want there. So we'll explore that issue a little further. and-
Bring back a narrative
Yes,
on that?
absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah, the goal will be like a constitutional law term paper. You'll see
yeah.
pros, cons, all that there.
The law school I never went to?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. All right, can you get a second?
Second.
All right.
You
Nicole?
want me to reread?
Yep.
Okay. So the motion moved by Sneddon, second by Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez, that we continue this item with considerations to include, we took that out, that looking at the signs for, that are informational, look at the murals and advise to go to Arts Advisory for input, also forming a new committee considering murals with those decisions being appealable, and the sign materials be considered for environmental impact and more targeted meetings with the Santa Barbara Association of Realtors.
Can I ask, do we take it out altogether, the noticing for informational? We went back and forth, informational, public good, free speech. Did we take?
Take it all out?
No, I thought what I heard you read back, it had it eliminated.
No, okay, and then I said we took that out.
So I think we want
We want that
that
back in.
in, a consideration of some type of public information space.
And we can just explore.
Explore.
Explore
Yeah.
that, so bring back.
Okay. I have it in there. I'm just going to take the vote.
Do you have to
We
read
good?
it again or not?
I have it.
Do you want to
No,
read it again?
I think we're
Okay.
good. I
All right.
think we've got it.
Everybody good?
Are we good?
Okay, let's go.
Okay. Let's go ahead and vote, please. And that passes unanimously. Thank you.
All right, and thank you all for the time spent, and we'll be adjourned.